Oftentimes when we talk about Protestants converting or considering conversion to Catholicism or Eastern Orthodox and the objections that go with that, we often focus on the intellectual roadblocks, whether that be specific dogmas around Mary or the infallibility of councils or popes or interesting kind of nuanced points of theology. And all of those are really important. And as someone who's studied theology, I love talking about those things, and they make for interesting discussions. But I think there's an element of that conversation that goes missing, but is a major stumbling block for a lot of evangelicals who are looking into these things. And I think rightly so, whether it's a decisive stumbling block or not. I think it's something that deserves consideration and something that we should talk about more. So that's what we're going to do today. And today we're talking about the idea of mission. Now, when I talk about mission, I don't mean like international missions. I'm not talking about going to different countries, although that could be involved in this. I'm not talking about kind of like the modern mission movement, but I'm talking about the sense of mission, like living on mission is something that evangelical Christians will often say. And what they mean by that is something akin to seeing your life as revolving around spreading the gospel. And I think there's an important distinction here in that while Catholics and Orthodox often see the church as an institution, at least in some way, if not the predominant way of thinking about the church, I think for at least kind of the more low church evangelical Protestants, the church is more, first and foremost, it's a movement. It's a gathering of people for the purpose of spreading the gospel to all nations and reaching their neighbors, their families, their communities. Let me put it this way. I talk to people who watch this channel or people who are interested in this topic often, and they say, look, like, I think it's really interesting what Catholics and Orthodox are doing with their theology. I think there's a lot of depth there. I'm maybe intellectually drawn towards it in certain ways. But when I look at what is going on in their churches, it just doesn't, it might seem beautiful aesthetically, but it seems dead in terms of mission compared to my non-denominational Protestant church. And maybe they even say, like, I'm not sure non-denominationalism as like a form of church is the best or the most ideal, but man, does it work. I'm seeing lives transformed. I'm seeing people encounter the gospel, and I don't know how to give that up. And I think sometimes in the conversations that we have online, this is kind of dismissed as like, okay, but like what matters is the truth. And of course, the truth is really important. I'm not saying we evade the truth, but I do think this is a discussion that is really important. And I think it's an area that Protestant or that Catholics and Orthodox can maybe learn from Protestants, that overarching sense of the urgency of the message of the gospel. I'm not talking about having a savior complex for everyone around you, but I am talking about thinking that the good news is really good and wanting to spread it to as many people as possible. To talk about my own experience a little bit, I think people would be surprised to find that I attend a low church, non-denominational evangelical church. And if you saw the things that I was interested in, you'd say, like, what? And I get that. And, you know, that has multiple factors to it. And a lot of that has to do with kind of my wife's worship preferences and a relationship we have with the pastor and all of that. But one of the things that draws me to it, amidst all of my kind of struggles theologically, all the wrestling I've had intellectually, and how much I love liturgy and how interested I am in the early church and the pull I felt towards Catholicism or Orthodoxy for so long, one of the things that I do really love about where I'm at is the sense of mission. I mean, in the church I'm at right now, the last year they baptized over 100 people. More than 50% of those were men. And that might seem like an odd thing to throw out, but I think when you look at the church and see how predominantly women factor into the church of all stripes, right? We primarily see women in churches, and that's really hard to reach young men. But the problem with that is not that women are lesser in any way, but it's that statistics show that when you reach the father of a household, when you reach the man in the house, you generally see that the kids and the wife go to church and stay in church for longer, versus when only the mom goes to church, you see the husband and the kids being less involved. And so it's really important that we have strong fathers for all of these reasons, but strong fathers in the church. And so it's been so encouraging for me each week to just hear these stories of transformation of these young men or men of all ages coming to hear the gospel. And when I'm involved in that church, I hear people who every day their heart just breaks for their neighbors, who are praying for their friends at work, who are bringing them into these groups to church for the first time, and they're encountering Christ. And yes, there's a part of me that can look and say like, but would it be better if this institution was set up this way or that? And I understand that. And the theological arguments of like, does this model of the church make sense? I hear all of that, and something I'm still actively wrestling through. But I do think it's important that we consider just how important mission is, because we were talking about people's lives being transformed. And sometimes I wonder if all the evangelicals were to become Catholic, like say tomorrow, would it be a net positive for the church? Or if they were all to become Orthodox, would it be a net positive? And that's a really hard question for me to answer, because I think unity is so important. Christ clearly desires that. At the same time, I see such a need being met by evangelicals in the culture right now. And I think that this desire to reach the lost, not saying it doesn't exist among Catholics or Orthodox, but I think it's something that the evangelical church has really championed and is a really beautiful thing. And sometimes I'm a little concerned as I look at the online landscape where I'm at, that there's so much zeal among Catholics and Orthodox to convert evangelicals, but I don't see proportionally kind of the same energy and effort and results, frankly, going into converting the atheists or the nuns or the skeptics. I mean, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that despite, maybe the bubbles that we live in, the young people in our culture are going away from the church at record numbers. Like things are not looking good. And sometimes it feels like we're so focused on getting, Protestants to become Catholic or Orthodox that we're like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Now, I don't think the church is actually sinking, and I don't think the gates of hell will overcome the church. But we have to be honest. Like, the outlook is a little bleak in the West, at least right now. And if the whole game plan is just to make Protestants Catholic or Orthodox, we're still not going to be doing great. And so I think we have to really retain that focus on reaching the lost and bringing them into places that they can encounter Christ for the first time and experience that transformation. And so I guess in some ways this is also a challenge to my Catholic and Orthodox brothers. I get why you want Protestants to become Catholic and Orthodox, and I think it's good for the church to be united. And I understand that when you can convert really engaged Protestants, that they're going to bring more life into your church, and they might bring people with them, and that's not a bad thing, and I'm not trying to stop that. But I think we have to look beyond that, right? Like we do have to reach the lost, and you can fault evangelicals for their methods, or you might say it's shallow, or kind of the certain ways they go about it might not be the best. But man, shouldn't all of our hearts break for the lost? Shouldn't all of us desire for our neighbors to encounter the gospel? And shouldn't all of us see our whole life as an outpouring for Christ, that we might be living sacrifices? And that looks like desiring the good of those around us and spreading the gospel. So I know this is a lot. And I don't have, kind of clear takeaways for you that this is the way we're going to do it. But I think it's important to remember that this is all more than just the intellect. And there's more at stake here than winning arguments and being right and getting more people on our team. As much as the truth matters, and as important as all those things are, we can't lose sight that the gospel is really good news. And I think we have to make sure we don't get so buried in our theological battles that we forget that we are living in a broken world in need of the good news of Christ. And so whether that's evangelicals continuing to do what they do, or the church collectively recognizing that and finding better ways to reach those around us, I think we need to keep thinking about this. But more importantly than thinking about it, we need to keep living it.